Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and today I want to talk about our journey to getting our homestead or our forever stead. And I want you to know that I'm really not a perfect homesteader, and that's okay. Like, I definitely don't have a farm that is going to appear in a magazine anytime soon, and I'm okay with that. And I think it's important for us to talk about the journey of becoming a homesteader. And even though I would kind of class myself as being a beginner still, like I'm still learning, and I don't think I'm ever not going to be learning when it comes to having a homestead. But I want you to understand that things are a journey and a process, and it's not just kind of one day I jumped all in and decided to do this. It was things that have happened over a number of years, and I don't want you to get discouraged by that. But I figured that maybe sharing the story of how this came to be might help you on your journey to having a homestead. Because you might have a similar dream. You might want to move to the country and have a quaint old farmhouse and live off the land as much as you can. Maybe you're wanting an off-grid lifestyle where you are completely living off the land. Maybe you want a little house in the woods, or maybe you're just wanting a thriving vegetable garden in your backyard to cut the cost of groceries. Homesteading is a different journey and a different dream for every single one of us. And my dream was kind of different from what I originally wanted many, many years ago. And I think it's important to really talk about some of these things and some things that happen on this journey to becoming a homesteader, and some of the skills that we've certainly looked at learning as we have really dug into this path of becoming homesteaders. So let's dig in and talk a little bit about that. Now, I've always loved being in the garden as a kid. Like, I earned my pocket money doing stuff in the garden. That's an allowance if you're here in America. I remember trying very, very hard to sway my parents into letting me have a vegetable patch and a little rabbit area out in the back garden. I mean, I was showing my parents plans and how we could make this work and what materials that we needed to be able to do it. And like that didn't happen. It really didn't happen. I was able to grow stuff at my grandparents' house, and I was always able to get stuck in and help them with their gardens. But my parents never really grew anything in the garden. If they did veggies and stuff, it was in a grow bag or in a container. And actually this year, I mean, I am almost 40, and this is like the first year my parents have ever grown anything in a little patch in their garden, and they've been sending me messages about it, and it's made me so happy. Like, I just had to move out for a long time, and then they thought about doing it. So they're just starting their journey to growing food in their back garden. They're just kind of experimenting with a few different things, and some things work, some things didn't. And that's kind of cool for them to be doing. But I've always had some level of gardening in some way, shape, or form, no matter where I have lived. And I've lived in lots of different areas. I've lived in flats or apartments, condos. I've lived in houses with gardens, houses that didn't. I've lived in different places in the UK, different places here in America. Like, I've gardened in lots of different growing conditions. So, you know, some things have definitely worked and some things haven't. But my idea of having a homestead started really as a dream to move to a farm. I mean, years and years and years ago. And I wanted to farm sheep in Scotland with my beloved border collie Sparky, and that didn't pan out. I'm now in Maine. Sparky passed the Rainbow Bridge a few weeks ago, and he was never really going to be a sheepdog, even though he was a from working dog stock. He was great to herd up the chickens and ducks, but he never really was bothered by sheep. And even when given the opportunity, he did not want to herd the sheep at all. So that probably would not have worked well for either of us. But the thought of having a farm really led me into researching farming and different types of farms. And then as I was looking into things like subsistence farming, I stumbled into small holdings in the UK and what those looked like, and homesteading here in America. So I devoured as much information about homesteading and smallholding as I possibly could. I was watching shows about people who were leaving the corporate world and going into farming or living off the land. I was reading books about it. I tried to get as much information about it as I possibly could. And this was over a long time. And I still have books from the UK about having small holdings and stuff. Like now I live in the US. And although things like the regulations and stuff are very different, there's still valuable information that I get from reading those books. And I still read them a lot. So I have quite an extensive library about these farming and homesteading skills, and I'm always like adding my knowledge to it, whether I'm getting books from the library and reading about things or I'm watching a video about stuff. I was always learning about these things, and a lot of these books that I have about self-sufficiency or back to basic or kind of country living type of books, a lot of the information that was in them, even when I was living in an apartment, like I was still reading and getting ideas for things. There was always stuff that I could still be doing, even in an apartment setting. And having that knowledge meant that as I came into like a community garden, for example, I had ideas on what it was that I wanted to grow and how to grow it, or I had ideas for how I was going to build a compost bin, for example. Like I had these ideas because I'd spent time researching and really getting a good knowledge base behind me. So that's one thing that I did quite a lot of, was really digging into the research, because I've found, certainly as I've gotten older, having a lot of different ways of doing stuff really helps you with being able to innovate and come up with ideas on how to problem solve on the homestead. And just generally as I got older, I spent a lot more time in the garden. I spent the time learning some of these skills to grow my own vegetables or fruits and herbs. And all throughout, my childhood and my early 20s and 30s, like I have been learning homesteading skills on the way. And that's not meant to be like a discouraging statement for you, like, oh my gosh, it's going to be like 30 years before I get to where I want to be. Like, what is your homesteading dream? Like, what is your why? Like, what is it that you are picturing? And seeing that these skills that you are learning is going to help you get to that step. And, even with a small garden, I didn't always succeed. And I have things that don't work even now. And I don't have a huge homestead. I mean, there's homesteaders that have got hundreds of acres. I have 3 acres, and that is a lot for me. And, things don't always pan out. And mistakes or failures are not really failures. They're ways that we learn so that we can adapt and adjust what we're doing in our homestead or our garden for next time. So our journey to get here isn't a smooth one. It's had a lot of ups and downs, and that is completely normal. And it's not something that seems to be talked about a lot. When I watch videos about homesteading or shows about homesteading, like you don't always kind of see what has sort of happened in the background to get there. It's always like everything's sunshine and rainbows and there's unicorns running around or whatever, and that doesn't that's more the rarity than the norm, I think. So don't be discouraged if you're having struggles. You are not alone. And just to show you that I still have things go wrong, I'm going to share a few things that have, been a failure, and I'm using that in quotation marks. So you can get an idea of, what we messed up on. So our garden flooded with all the rain. It flooded this year and it flooded the year before. The deer ate 80% or more of the veggies that I planted last year when we first moved. Oh gosh, yeah, not a couple of years ago. I mean, a couple of years ago as in being like a solid decade now. We had rats in our compost pile one time. That was gross. Hawks got our chickens one time. Completely lost a garden to drought one year. I lost my seed collection to damp. That was terrible. And garden beds got overrun with weeds. So that's just a few things, and there's tons more. But those are things that are pretty memorable for us. But we learned and adapted. And we learn and adapt, so we make changes to try and avoid these problems next time. And if you haven't listened to the interview that I did with Noah from Boomy Devi Seeds last week, we talked a lot about experimenting in your garden to see what works. So definitely go back and check out that episode because there's a ton of great information that's in there to inspire you in your garden and homestead. Now let's talk about some of the things that we adapted to try and avoid the problems. So to combat the flooding, we are going to be making swales and some terraces further up the hill to move the water to a pond that is going to be going in. So that hasn't been done yet, but that is on plan for this fall. The deer problem, that was resolved by we saved up money and we put in a wire fence with engineering stakes on T-posts. So it wasn't an overly expensive fence to put in. The most expensive piece actually I think was saving up for those T-posts because those were pretty spendy. But that was something that we did, and the deer have now not been getting into the garden. If they do again, then my next step is going to be putting a electric fence on. So that should help discourage the deer. So that's how we stopped that. We changed how we compost. So we used a metal tumbling composter instead when we lived in the suburbs to discourage rodents because they weren't getting into that composter. And whenever we had a lot of materials that we were putting in the composter, so we were doing one on the ground, we made sure to turn it at least once a week, and that helped to discourage rodents. And we also wanted to we put snap traps in boxes, and we put those around, so if we were going to catch something we would. We just needed to be a little bit better in checking those traps, because I do remember one day where my dog Volt found a dead rat in one of the snap traps and was running around the garden with it. It was so gross. But, these are things, again, it's a teachable moment that we could learn. How could we do a bit better that time? Maybe check the traps before letting the dogs out. That would be helpful. Our hawk problem was resolved by having our chickens in a pen that had a top cover that stopped birds of prey getting in. We also stopped free ranging in the backyard to protect the flock. So that then evolved into our chicken tractor setup that we're using here on the homestead as well. The year that we lost the garden to drought was the year that pushed me to set up rainwater catchment off the shed. So that I would have water to use in the garden next year, because we had hose pipe bans in the UK. We weren't able to actually set up a hose to water the garden. Everything had to be done, certainly on the allotment, it had to be done by a watering can, and I wasn't anywhere near the pipe and the faucet to get the water. So everything just kind of got lost with a drought. It was also when I really started saving seeds and looking into really creating my own varieties that were thriving in the garden, and that's now evolved into a much heavier seed saving and developing land races, which I've talked about before on the podcast and written about on the blog. So you can read into that a little bit more. Next, losing seeds to damp. Oh my gosh, that was heartbreaking for me, because so many I couldn't replace, because there were seed companies that have since gone out of business, or people have passed away. They're no longer sharing those seeds. So that was a pretty tough thing to go through. But now I use old clean jars. So like if you get like a jar of sauce or whatever from the grocery store, I will wash and dry those jars and I put my seeds in those. And I'm also working to actually grow out my seed collection. So growing out varieties and saving the fresh seed, because realistically the best place for seeds to be is growing in our garden and not in a jar sitting in a basement not doing anything. Like, plants want to be out, they want to be growing, they want to be able to pollinate and produce more seeds. That's what plants want to do. And then the final thing is, after digging and tilling my beds, they are so overrun with weeds because they're getting light, they're getting water, they're able to germinate. I spent so much time, like hours upon hours upon hours a week, just trying to get the weeds, back a little bit. I did more than that than anything else, and it was just such a big waste of time. And that's when I switched to a no-dig or no-till garden, and it has significantly saved my time, especially when I'm having to work full-time. And that's a reality. Like, I still work full time. I'm not doing the homestead thing full time. Would I love to? Absolutely. But that's not the reality, unfortunately. So how can I make things a lot more automated or reduce the work so I can work smarter, not harder for some of these things? And that's where, like, a lot of reading and research and getting inspired from what other people are doing really helps you as a homesteader and a gardener. So mistakes and failures are really these teachable moments, as my husband calls them, and they really help guide to how we work with our land to homestead. And honestly, even though I didn't have a couple of acres to homestead on, I was making do with what I had available, whether it was growing in containers or, growing some herbs on a patio or a deck, or I had a rented spot in a community garden or an allotment, or I was growing like some beans in my granny's garden, whatever it was. We started small, and even when I bought my first house, we started with 6 raised beds because the first year was so overrun with weeds in the previous owner's garden because they had tilled everything. I couldn't keep up with it. So starting small, practice your skills, find out what works for you and what doesn't. You can always build more beds or add more garden space or more containers with plants in, like, once you get the hang of things over a couple of seasons. And that's okay. But maybe that your skills being extended isn't necessarily by growing more, but it's by using what you have. So maybe it is using them more in the kitchen and learning to cook. Maybe your skills are around seed saving instead of trying to make the garden bigger. Maybe you're trying to seed save more instead. And that's a really great homestead skill to have too. Now, once we got the hang of having a garden where we added livestock. And for us, livestock looked like chickens and a beehive. Now, we could only have 6 chickens, per the rules of the city, and we worked with the city for where the coop could go, the hive could go, the licenses that were needed to be in place, the inspections. The city had to come and do an inspection and sign off on everything, and we did all of that good stuff. And getting our first ever egg was such a great feeling. And honestly, watching the chickens was kind of fun after work. But I'm going to be honest, we had a really, really big learning curve there as well. Like, we have lost birds from predators, them getting sick, spoiled food, sickly chicks that didn't survive, cannibalism. Yep, we had a Hannibal Lecter, and that was horrible. But over the years that we have kept backyard chickens, we have learned a lot, and we've took those learnings and we've used them here on the farm. So we've changed how we've built coops, like what worked well for the coops that we had in the suburbs, what didn't, how we're protecting the birds from the predators, right? How we plan to incorporate kitchen scraps to make compost for more of a permaculture approach to chicken keeping, right? Those things have all kind of been thought about and learned from our previous experience on a smaller scale. We've also rethought about little things like going organic, not using medicated chick feed for the baby chicks, how we give our chickens their food to reduce the waste that's spilled all over the floor, giving them grit or crushed oyster shell. Like, that was an interesting innovation that we had, and that came through being part of some poultry keeping or chicken keeping groups through Facebook. So there was somebody who had a mayonnaise, like plastic mayonnaise jar, and they had it screwed underneath their coop. So the chickens were able to get to it whenever they wanted, and they'd put in like little holes so the birds could just kind of peck through and get what they needed through the little holes. And I thought, that's kind of a cool idea. And it was out the way, it didn't take up a lot of room, and I guess they just kind of like screwed the lid of the mayonnaise jar like up into the bottom of the coop, and then they just, when they need to refill it, they just unscrew it, fill it up, and then screw it back in. And that was kind of awesome. I really loved how that was done. I don't have like a coop that's that high to be able to do that with, or the container that we've got's pretty huge. So what I've done, or what I'm planning on doing, depending on when this podcast goes out, is I'm screwing the plastic jar that used to have dog food treats in, because I've got one that's kind of square shaped, so I could screw it into the side of the coop and then just have like a little slot cut out where the chickens can go in and like peck out their oyster shell or their grit, whatever it is that they need as and when they need it. So I can have one for the oyster shell, one for the grit. I can put it in the movable coop, so it moves with them, like it's all fine and dandy. But that was just something that was inspired by somebody else that was doing it, and I love the fact that it's using up and recycling something that was going to be waste, right? Use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. And we'd been looking at, getting a different feeder or something just for the grit and the oyster shell, which is crazy pants. Like, why buy one when I can make something do? So you never know quite where inspiration will come. And same for things like providing water over winter. Now, where we used to live, like, the water froze over winter, and what we would do is we would bring in the waterer inside and on a night so it was not frozen, and then in the morning we would go put out that water so the chickens were able to have like unfrozen water. Here in Maine, obviously the winters are a lot colder, and we got to figure out very quickly how we're going to be able to provide the chickens with water. And there's some other things that we're thinking about because of work schedules and stuff like that, how we're going to be able to do some of these things. So again, we're building on the skills and experiences that we have, but we're also like talking to people and, looking at what other people do. And if you're in these kind of homesteading groups, or gardening groups and stuff, particularly in Facebook, you can always search through previous posts, like within the group, like search for different keywords and kind of look to see how people are doing this. Like, for example, keeping the water unfrozen, right? You could search for unfrozen water or water in winter, something like that. So you can take a look and see how other people are doing it. There might be a method that works for you, but know that not every method that people are using is going to work for you, and that's okay. So we're learning stuff. We are still learning stuff, and we're always going to be learning stuff. And even now, we have definitely learned stuff. So I mentioned about how our protection from the predators fed into how we have built a coop here. So recently, this is a very recent learning that we have. So I came up with an idea of our movable hoop coop greenhouse. So it is a movable chicken tractor. It is like fully covered with hardware cloth and chicken wire over hog panel fencing. Like it is very sturdy. It's kind of hard for things to get in and out in terms of predators. And my idea was, when it wasn't being used throughout the summer, it was just basically going to be sitting there, not used over winter. I could throw over some greenhouse plastic and I can use it as a greenhouse to overwinter plants to save seed from or harvest or whatever in the garden, right? That was my plan. I wanted it to pull double duty and be able to be used for multiple things. So our idea was, this has got wheels on it, we can move it around, we can move the chickens every day, it'll be great. And the thought of it is great if you were on level ground. Most of our land is a north-facing slope. It is very uneven. There's lots of dips and troughs in there and little hilly bits and stuff. The hoop coop is great in certain parts of the yard where it is flat, but the day-to-day moving the hoop is a 2 to 3 person task. It's really hard to move it because of the nature of the ground. And I'll be honest, like, it's quite difficult to get the motivation to move the hoop coop at dusk when all the chickens have gone into bed, because the coop inside of that hoop coop doesn't have wheels on it. So somebody's got to basically get into the hoop coop, move the roosting coop about, then the other people have got to move the outer hoop coop and move it around so we can wheel it all the way back and put the birds on a new amount of grass, right? It's a bit of a pain to do. It's really hard to get the motivation, especially if it's pouring with rain and it's dark outside. But we're not discouraged because we're moving to electric poultry fencing and some netting overhead to protect the birds from birds of prey, right? That's our next step of our next experiment. Is this going to work better? It's going to give the chickens a bigger space to move in, around, and forage. I still get the benefit of that chicken tractor, where they're basically clearing that ground. They're eating all those bugs and pests. They're tilling it all up. And, we can get the electric fencing set up on unlevel ground. Is there a way that we can have the coop, like the roosting coop, open and close automatically, so we don't need to walk down the 3 acres to the coop when it's dark in the morning to get the birds out? Maybe there's something that will work there. There's automatic doors and all sorts of things nowadays. So there might be some stuff there, and there's definitely an area of research and testing for us to look into with a new setup. Again, we're experimenting on what works for our homestead, our schedule, like how can we make this work and how can we get kind of creative. Maybe it works better if we were to move the chickens up closer to the house, and then we're able to, keep an eye on them a little bit better, and we're able to nip out and open up the coop in a morning and stuff, even though there's 3 feet of snow on the ground. Like there's things that we obviously are going to be learning as we go through our first winter with chicken keeping. And, I know I'm focusing on chickens because it's something that we're actively learning on right now. But that's, could be said for anything. It could be your first spring garden. It could be, you building garden beds for the first time. Like, it's really experimenting and trying new things and what works, right? For us, our the garden beds that we set up where we used to live were these hugel beds. So they had like branches and bits of wood and stuff in the bottom of them that then broke down and decomposed over time. And we had the most beautiful and productive gardens growing because of that. And that's not what we're experiencing now as no-till gardeners. We're actually struggling quite a bit, although it's been a difficult year with the weather. We've had so much rain, a lot of rain, and because of a lot of rain, there's been a lot of mold problems inside as well as outside. There's lots of diseases and things. So, is it that it's just been a bad year, or is it because of how we're growing? Not so sure, but what we do know is we want to actually put in some hugelkultur beds, because we know that is something that has worked well for us in the past, and we want to try and grow like that again and see, is this going to be something that's going to work? Now, we're not going to convert all of the beds to hugelkultur beds in one go. Absolutely not. We're going to make one hugel bed and see whether it's going to work. And if it does work well, then we will expand. Again, starting small, testing it, working onto something bigger. And honestly, when my husband and I sort of got together and, started talking about like wanting this homesteady type of lifestyle, we started learning skills, whether it was DIY, home repair, building things, or woodworking and basic carpentry were things that he was good at. I dived into things like crochet, knitting, sewing, quilting, but I also did, woodworking and building stuff. Like, I always try and help, as much as my husband and I don't work well together when we're building something. We've actually come a long way in terms of working together, and I really loved building the chicken coops with him, and I learned so much. Like, I didn't know anything about framing, and now I feel pretty confident that I could actually frame stuff. Like, I feel, I definitely feel confident in demolishing stuff because I've been able to do that where we used to live. And now as I look around the room that I'm recording in, my brain's already thinking about, remodeling this room and what that's going to look like. But, he's got a lot of skills and he's been able to teach those to me. He doesn't have any interest in doing crochet or knitting other than me making him a cable knit sweater, which we've been married for almost 10 years and he's still waiting for that. So sometime I will get to it. But really, like, digging into some of these other skills are part of our homesteading journey. Most recently, I'm learning about clothing repair, and I'm finding joy in darning socks of all things. Like, I never thought I would be darning socks, and I wish my grandmother was still here because I would be talking to her about darning socks. And I wish that was a skill that I had learned from her, but it wasn't. It was something that I had learned from books. It was books that my grandmother had left me, but also things from the library and also videos like YouTube. YouTube has been such a great resource. There's a lot of classes as well that are available. There might be classes that you could take at a local community college, a quilt shop, adult learning annexes or evening classes, even weekend classes, right? There's a lot of things that are available, and some of the classes might be more expensive than others. So, you might want to shop around a bit, try and find something that's going to work for you and your budget. But on the surface, some of these skills might seem more like hobbies, but we've actually leveraged these things into homesteading skills for us. So carpentry, great example, put to great use building pens, coops, greenhouses, garden boxes, and so much more. Finer woodworking has meant that we could build furniture. My husband's built furniture. We've repaired things that we bought very cheap or found for free. Like I've refinished a 50-year-old sewing machine that came in a cabinet. We have repaired it. We have I have repaired it. Like I've repaired the sewing machine and got that all working. My husband helped me repair the cabinet, repaint it, refinish it. Like he refinished the top, like shellacked it, and it is so smooth and easy to work with. And I love quilting and sewing on my vintage machine. I can't get enough of it. It's amazing. But these are skills that we learned, and I think I maybe paid like $100 for this machine, and it had all the stuff with it and this cabinet. It's been great. But this was turning something that was very inexpensive, and it has, I mean, I use this thing almost every week. It's been awesome. And that's kind of like the power of building these skills. And you know, very much like my husband's grandfather's saying of use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without, just is constantly in my head for things, because we're really able to make the best use of resources that are already here. So things like crochet, it became, I mean, it was always a hobby. Like it's very calming. I can just focus on counting the stitches, or, you know, just be focused in the moment of what I'm doing. And I love doing crochet. Absolutely love it. It's one of those things I can pick up, I can put down, it's portable, right? It's more portable than quilting for me. But it became a way to be able to make clothing, like sweaters or cardigans or hats, scarves, mittens, right? Blankets, and it was things that we could use as gifts, or we could use for ourselves to keep us warm. Sewing, that was, you know, a great skill to learn, and I'm not a pro. I still make mistakes, but I love the joy of learning. So I was learning to make bags, aprons, placemats, pillows, things that would be useful. I love upcycling stuff. Absolutely love it. One of the greatest joys that I have is like taking something that is a scrap and making it into something else. And quilting is a skill that I have really, really recently picked up, and I love it. It's been a wonderful way to gift loved ones with something that brings them warmth, comfort, and love, as well as using fabric that I have stashed for a long time, but that's a different story. But also, you know, it's been a really wonderful way for me to connect with people and have somebody teach me how to make a quilt, and bond over some really wonderful, you know, stories and time spent with people. So there's a lot more that comes out of that. And clothing repair, of course, helps keep things going a lot longer without the need to keep buying clothes. And all of that has fed into keeping our living expenses much lower. And our journey to homesteading wasn't just gardening and building these skills and having chickens or bees. It was about making other changes in our life that helped us get here too. So we looked at buying things from the thrift store, local classifieds, yard sales, or finding things on the side of the road for free. Like seriously, the roadside will provide, especially if you're in a town or city. But even living rurally, oh my gosh, like there's always something on the side of the road that people are giving away for free. It's crazy. But we have found tables, chairs, a sofa that was in great shape for free. Like checking out what's available for free, and the classifieds can help you find anything for free, from chickens or manure. Actually, okay, let's do an experiment. I'm just going to take a quick peek and see what's for free right now in my state on one of the classifieds. Let's have a look. There are, wood pallets. There's loads of things you can do with wood pallets as a homesteader. There's a computer desk. I think I saw in one of the chicken groups, somebody had converted a computer desk into a coop, so that was kind of cool. There's some sofas for free, a 250-gallon oil tank. Oh, there's a sump pump. I could do with a sump pump with my flooding problem. Project wood for free, spearmint. Ooh, want some plants. a bike. Oh my gosh. So there's loads of stuff free for a homesteader here. So that's crazy. Always kind of look to see what your options are to get it for free or lower cost first. Like, we cut out our unnecessary spending. We paid off debt like student loans, car finances, credit cards, store cards. Like, we paid off everything and then started to save up money. And like, we knew that having a homestead was going to mean that there would be some infrastructure that would be needed. Like, I didn't think that when we were getting to where we wanted to be with having a bit of land, like, I didn't think that it would have, the coops and things on there that we wanted. So I always figured that there was going to be some level of money that was going to be needed to be able to update things or repair stuff. Because there's lots of things that are going to require money to fix things, right? Like the coops or fencing that's going to need to be put in. Maybe you need an incubator for hatching eggs, or maybe you need money for a sewing machine. Maybe you need to buy in compost or topsoil to build your garden. Maybe you need a pressure canner, right? There's a lot of things that you might need to invest in your infrastructure for your homestead. And we acquired things over time, like canners, for example. We started with a relatively inexpensive one, like nearly 10 years ago. Obviously, the prices have changed now, but we have a bigger one that we saved up for. But we worked at it slowly and used what we had, and then got the bigger one as we needed to. So those things took time for us to acquire as well. Same with things like canning jars. Like, whenever those were on sale, I would, buy, a pack of them to make sure that we had plenty for the upcoming season. So I always started off small, and same with things like saving up money. I mean, it took time to do that, and it still takes time to do that. So like, once we've had to use some of that money to put in some infrastructure, we need to rebuild that again. And there's a lot of really great information about tackling debt, saving money, and investing. It's a lot more accessible than it used to be, and I am sure if you were to spend some time doing a little bit of research, you will find somebody who has got the right voice that you need to hear to help you on your journey there. And I'm not going to get into how we saved money and did all of that. I mean, that's probably an entire episode in itself on like the frugal tips and stuff that we did to be able to pay off our debt and start saving money. And it's a normal thing for most people in this day and age to have to deal with, but it's not always something that is talked about. So, we've all made mistakes. Like, all of us have made mistakes, but each day we can make each day a little bit better than we were the day before, and start working towards the dreams that you have and the life that you want. And that's kind of where we are too. Homesteading is hard work and can be overwhelming if you're overstretched with too many things, but there's a huge amount of joy that can come with it too. So I would love to know from you, what skills are you working on right now for your homestead? Let me know over in the Facebook group. And until next time, I hope your garden grows beautifully, and I'll see you all next week.